and work away.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our final lecture of this elongated season. Once again, can I express my gratitude on behalf of Cork DFAS to Nangle Place for making it possible for us to run these lectures this year. Before I introduce the speaker, I just want to point out that next Saturday, as a special for our members only, that we will be having a guided tour, virtual tour of Nangle Place at 11:30, and the link for that will be sent out next week by Karen and Kathy. This is an example of that. In addition to running our program of informal lectures, we also try to run various other events for our members during the year, which of course haven't been really that possible in the last 12 months. So as I say, for our members next Saturday, there will be a virtual tour of Nangle Place. Okay. As always, just remember to use the Q&A if you want to ask questions to the lecturer. And now let me finally introduce our lecturer this morning. I'm delighted to welcome back Bláithín Hurley, a lecturer in the history of art at University College Cork. Last month, having spoken to us about developments in the fine arts in Cork in the middle of the 19th century, this week, she is going to talk to us on the, a lecture entitled An Indulgence to the Natives, William Bedell's translation of the Old Testament into Irish. So without further ado, Bláithín.
Thanks very much, Brendan. Now I'll try and share my screen and hopefully that will work and we can get started. Right, I hope everybody can see that. And it's lovely to be back again, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk today about this very important work, the translation of the Old Testament into Irish by William Bedell. People have often heard maybe about the translation and about the Bible, but never really understanding who William Bedell is or why he did this or what it meant to the people of Ireland when he did. So I'm hoping that by the end of today, you'll all have a better idea as to who he was and what the project was all about. So to get started, so who exactly was William Bedell? Well, he was born in Essex in England in 1571. And we have a look at what he looked like there. He was educated at Emmanuel College in Cambridge before being ordained for the Anglican Ministry in 1597. Already at that stage, Bedell was known for his scholarship in theology, the Bible, and the classics, and was proficient in Arabic, Chaldean, Greek, Latin, and Syriac. In 1607, he was sent to Venice as chaplain to Sir Henry Wotton, English ambassador to that city-state. And while in Venice, Bedell added Italian and Hebrew to his language repertoire, as he quickly realized that in order to teach people about religion and to communicate properly with them, one needs to speak their language. This was a tenet he kept with him for the rest of his life, and which came to the fore when he moved to Ireland to take up the position of Provost of Trinity College, Dublin in 1627. Throughout the remaining 14 years of his life, he strove to put into practice what he had learned in Venice, that is, to speak to people in their own language. This culminated in his greatest labour, the translation of the Bible Old Testament into Irish. Sadly, he didn't live to see the work published, but his legacy remains an important building block in Irish history. And in this paper, I'll take a step back from the Bible itself to examine the influence Venice exerted over the young cleric, especially in relation to his determination to print an Irish language version of the Old Testament. So to begin, just how radical a notion would it have been for an English Anglican minister living in Ireland to decide to publish an Irish language translation of the Bible in the mid-17th century? After all, early modern Europe had borne witness to a veritable explosion in the publication of printed material. This included newspapers, journals, pamphlets, periodicals, and of course, books. This print explosion had been made possible through the invention of the printing press in the late 15th century. The invention had been quickly seized upon by, among others, religious reformers, and had been used by them to spread the word of God and their beliefs across Europe at incredible speed. Aligned to this was the new idea that the teachings of the gospel should be available to all people in their own language. The philosophy behind this thinking was that for someone to understand and therefore fully participate in the profession of their faith, they had to read, hear, and speak the words of this faith in their own language. The 1500s had seen the city of Venice in eastern Italy become a rising star in the production of printed matter. And this is the city which unwittingly played an important role in the production of the Bedell Bible through the influence it exerted on William Bedell. Following his education at Emmanuel College, Cambridge, a college that had become a centre of Puritan influence, Bedell was ordained in 1597, as I previously mentioned. In 1602, he was appointed vicar of St. Mary's in Bury St. Edmunds, one of the large Irish churches in England. In 1607, he left England when he was appointed chaplain to Sir Henry Wotton, then the English ambassador to Venice. Early 17th century Venice was a bustling merchant city, the gateway between east and west and north and south. It had built its wealth and reputation through trading with all nations and all cultures, and had become a centre point for artists and musicians as well as merchants. This was a city which was now a focus for printing, and it was here that movable print, as opposed to the static carved wooden blocks which had earlier been used in printing, became the staple means employed for producing works in Latin and Italian and other languages which used the Roman alphabet, but also Hebrew, Greek, and music notation. The latter languages, and I'm including music notation in this instance, required a specialist knowledge of the language involved to both cast and set the movable type. The printing houses of Venice therefore specialised in producing works of particular natures. For instance, there was the Petrucci, who printed musical scores, and the Giustiniani, who concentrated on works in Hebrew, as well as many smaller publishing houses who made their crust from producing editions and reprints of traditional works of jurisprudence and theology, sermons, and classical humanist works. Although, as already mentioned, Bedell was quite a linguist and spoke a number of languages before his arrival in Venice, Italian was not one of them. But on arrival, he quickly learned that in order to communicate fully with the Venetians, he needed to speak to them in their own language. This meant learning to speak and read Italian and having an understanding of Venetian, the local dialect. He also studied Hebrew with Leon de Modena, a rabbi of the synagogue in the Venetian ghetto, and acted as a theological mentor to the leaders of the anti-papal party in Venice. Bedell became a close friend of the reformer Fra Paolo Sarpi, a Servite friar, and he went on to write a series of sermons in Italian with Sarpi's disciple Fulgenzio Mecanzo. He helped publish and circulate an Italian translation of the Bible with Giovanni Diodati, a Tuscan convert to Anglicanism, and together they also translated the Book of Common Prayer into Italian. The latter was published posthumously in London in 1685. In 1610, Bedell returned to England, but his time spent in Venice had left a mark. He had learned firsthand that to communicate, preach, teach, and convert, one needs to speak the language of the people and provide them with material written in that language to read. In 1615, Bedell was made rector of the parish of Hornings Heath in Suffolk, near his former parish in Bury St Edmunds. He remained rector of the parish for 12 years and might have been happy to continue living in comparative obscurity, but for a chance meeting in London with his old friend from Venice, Giovanni Diodati. Diodati introduced Bedell to Thomas Morton, Bishop of Lichfield, and this in turn led to Bedell being suggested for the position of Provost of Trinity College, Dublin, which had become vacant following the death of Sir William Temple. On the nomination of King Charles and the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Fellows of Trinity College, Dublin voted for Bedell as Provost, and despite his reluctance to take up the position, in August 1627, he left his Suffolk and travelled to Dublin. Almost from the start, Bedell came into conflict with many of the Fellows at Trinity. He found discipline among the said Fellows and students alike to fall short of expectations, and he set about restoring this discipline, especially in regard to chapel observances and the use of the Irish language. Among the changes he brought about were the reading of a chapter of the New Testament during Commons by a native Irish speaker, and he introduced the saying of prayers in Irish in the chapel. To aid these changes, Bedell employed Murtagh King to teach Irish at Trinity. King was a member of the Bardic O'Keefe family from Kilcourcy, County Offaly. Already, Bedell was showing his understanding of the necessity to use Irish and not just English and Latin as the languages of religion and communication. Thus, he was harking back to his days in Venice. It would not be an understatement to say that Bedell's time at Trinity was difficult, but in 1629 he was appointed bishop to the United Diocese of Kilmore and Ardagh. However, Bedell found the amalgamated diocese in a deplorable state. Shortly after arriving in Kilmore, he wrote to William Laud, then Bishop of London and later Archbishop of Canterbury, telling him that his cathedral was without bell or steeple, font or chalice. With little choice, he set about repairing the cathedral and refurbishing the other churches in the diocese. But the rebuilding of the church buildings were, it could be said, the least of his problems. He also ran into difficulties with the clergy of the diocese. His direct altercations with them brought him into conflict with James Usher, Archbishop of Armagh, and when he tried to remove Nicholas Bernard, a former chaplain of Archbishop Usher, and Alan Cook, the Chancellor of the diocese, from their positions, he was refused support from the bishop and was overruled. Bedell was very troubled by this, as church corruption was an issue which caused him much annoyance. While in Venice, the dishonesty he witnessed in the Catholic Church impelled him all the more to try and convert Venetian Catholics to Anglicanism. So to now find that similar dishonesty was at play within his own clergy must have been particularly galling. Despite these distractions, Bedell continued to study the Irish language and encouraged the use of Irish in his diocese. His only work in Irish to be published in his lifetime was the ABC, or the Institution of a Christian, which was printed in Dublin by the Company of Stationers in 1631, and he distributed it free within his diocese. The publication included an alphabet, the Creed, Commandments, and the Lord's Prayer, as well as a series of scriptural passages on prayer and the sum of the Gospel. Graces before and after meals were also included, all in parallel English and Irish texts. The comparisons between this work and an earlier work from 1571 by Sean O'Ciarna, or John Carney, who had been treasurer of St. Patrick's in Dublin, Abadal Gaelga agus Catechisma, are unmistakable. O'Ciarna's Abadal was the first book to be in Irish to be printed in Ireland. It was printed in Dublin with a specially created Irish font, designed and cut for the purpose. And in 1602, the New Testament in Irish was printed. And in his dedication, William Daniel, the author of this publication, acknowledges the contribution of a number of individuals, including Sean O'Ciarna. William Daniel also translated an Irish version of the Book of Common Prayer, which was published in 1608. Interestingly, it should be stated here that William Daniel, a native Irish speaker from Kilkenny, was a contemporary of William Bedell in Emmanuel College and was already in a position in Trinity College when Bedell took up his post there. One might be tempted to say at this stage that it's a small world. Therefore, building on the work already done in Irish language printing in Ireland, Bedell set about producing his largest endeavour, an Irish language translation of the Old Testament. Bedell himself was not able to undertake the work of translation directly. He was not a native Irish speaker and, by his own admission, found the language difficult. And so he set about assembling a translation team, and the work began. The team was led by Murtagh King, who Bedell had earlier employed to instruct the fellows and students of Trinity College Dublin in Irish. By now, King was a fellow of Trinity College, and he was the main translator of the Bible. James Nangle, the next team member, was engaged on translating the Psalms. He seems to have been a Catholic when he was set to work on this project, but converted while staying in the bishop's house during the translation process. Also included in the team were Denis Sheridan, a native Irish speaker and a minister in the diocese, Bedell's chaplain and future son-in-law, Alexander Clogie, and his son, Ambrose Bedell. The team met daily, and their method was unique. Murtagh King started by translating the 1611 English authorised version of the King James Bible into Irish. He brought 2 copies of his finished pages to the daily meeting. Bishop Bedell then made a careful comparison of King's Irish translation with his own Hebrew Bible, a 3-volume work he had purchased when in Venice, noting any irregularities onto the copies. Ambrose Bedell then slowly read the English Bible out aloud, while his father followed in one Irish copy and Alexander Clogie in the other. Clogie was a Scot and a native Gaelic speaker. The Italian translation of the Bible by Giovanni Diodati, whose intervention had brought Bedell to Ireland in the first place, was kept at hand and consulted when any queries arose. The next stage also involved reading aloud. Bishop Bedell and Clogie read through the Irish verse by verse, alternating between each other. However, although they had the Irish in front of them, they translated into Latin as they went along, reading out the words in that language. The final stage, when the team was satisfied that the production of a fair copy was the production of a fair copy in loose sheets. This final copy was made by Denis Sheridan, the native Irish speaker and clergyman. Always concerned with communicating the gospel easily, the bishop insisted on simple language wherever possible, we were told later by his son. While this might seem like a very civilized and learned way of working, the translation was hampered on a number of fronts, not least of which was the drain on the bishop's time through his battles to rid the diocese of corruption. Added to this, Archbishop Laud of Canterbury and Lord Wentworth, the Lord Deputy of Ireland, were far from enthusiastic on the translation work, and when the Old Testament was completed, they poured scorn on the whole undertaking. King, they argued, was ill-equipped to make an accurate translation, as he was not a Hebrew scholar. Their spite was such that King was arrested in Dublin, Bedell went to Dublin to defend him in the church courts, but despite his best efforts, was unable to prevent King being imprisoned. Bedell began to petition Lord Wentworth for King's release, which eventually happened, but after much time, effort, and money had been spent. The next item to cause delay was the production of an Irish print font. One might have thought this was a relatively straightforward matter, given that the precedent had already been sent by O'Ciarna in 1571, and later when Bedell himself had arranged the printing of his ABC. But it seems that was not the case. Bedell tried and failed to source an Irish print font in Ireland or anyone willing to make one. In frustration, the bishop sent to Holland to have type for the printing cast at his own expense. By now, he had resolved to print the Bible himself in his own house. This might be due to what he saw when living in Venice, where it was not unusual for authors, especially music composers and theorists, to print their own work privately. And then the final disaster struck, the Irish Rebellion of 1641. This resulted in killing and looting on both sides, but as a consequence of his reputation for helping relieve the suffering of the poor, no matter what their faith, in his own diocese, Bishop Bedell was spared at first, and his home became a shelter for refugees. However, the rebel leaders wanted Bedell to evict the refugees. When he refused, he was arrested in December 1641 and imprisoned together with his sons and Alexander Clogie. They were held in Clough Castle, a single tower still standing in the water of Loch Uachtar in County Cavan today. The prisoners remained in the tower throughout a bitterly cold winter without either proper clothing or heating. The bishop, now 70 years old, never fully recovered from this ordeal. Eventually released in January of 1642 in an exchange of prisoners, he was allowed to go to the home of Denis Sheridan, which was crowded with refugees, and it was here that he died of typhus on the 7th of February, 1642. Bishop Bedell's burial was hurried as Clogie and Sheridan were afraid of provoking the rebels by using the Protestant burial service. However, the rebels surprised both ministers by accompanying the removal of the body from the house to the churchyard at Kilmore in great solemnity, and fired a salute over the bishop's grave, exclaiming as they did so, "Requiescat e pace al ultimus Angelorum." May the last of the English rest in peace. In Cavan, a plaque in his memory has been erected at Kilmore Churchyard, and in Emmanuel College in Cambridge, Bedell has been immortalised in a stained glass window in the college chapel, where he proudly holds his place among other illustrious alumni. But that's not the end of the story, because we have to ask the question, what happened to Bedell's Irish translation of the Bible? All Bedell's considerable library was now in disarray, having been rifled through following the bishop's eviction from his house. The Catholic bishop, Bishop Swiney, was now in residence there. Bishop Swiney had little interest in books, and, following the intervention of Denis Sheridan, some of Bedell's books were rescued, including the Hebrew Old Testament manuscript, which is now in the library of Emmanuel College. The manuscript of the Irish translation of the Old Testament also survived, but it was in a sorry state. It first passed into the hands of Bishop Jones of Meath, who made contact with Dr. Andrew Saul at Christ Church College in Oxford. Saul, in turn, wrote to Robert Boyle, the Irish-born scientist, in 1678, when he spoke about the necessity to revise the manuscript before bringing it to a publisher. The funds for the publication of the Old Testament in Irish were to be raised by subscription, and Bishop Jones was the instigator of this process. Robert Boyle put 50 shillings at his disposal for the purpose. Sadly, both Bishop Jones and Andrew Saul died before the project could be completed. Dr. Narcissus Marsh, then Provost of Trinity College, Dublin, took over the revising of the translation and was helped with the transcription by a Mr. Higgins, a native Irish speaker, among others. At last, in the year 1685, the Old Testament was published due to the intervention of Robert Boyle, who, seeing that the subscriptions necessary had not been forthcoming, paid for the publication, and this included the casting of the Irish language print type. The Bible from which I'm working today now forms part of the collection of the Cotton Library, a private diocesan library which is attached to St. Carthage's Cathedral, Lismore, County Waterford, the town in which Robert Boyle was born. William Bedell may never have seen his work published. However, from his arrival in Ireland, he understood the importance of communication through the Irish language. This in turn led to his assembling of the team which produced the translation of the Old Testament into Irish, and the later publication of the work under the auspices of Robert Boyle by the name it is now known today, the Bedell Bible. Gurif Magwif.
Thank you so much, Bláithín. I think Lorraine's going to thank you officially now for such a wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Oh, we can't hear you, Lorraine.
You're still muted, yeah.
Hello again, Bláithín. That was a wonderful lecture. I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of it due to technical problems, but it was fascinating. And I can see you've done a huge amount of work on this subject. But you carry it very lightly. You make it very you make it accessible to people like me anyway, which is wonderful. I just want to say thank you very much for your 2 lectures to us in the last month, isn't it? Really, just a little more.
Yes, yeah.
So, and we hope that I know you're a woman of many parts, and perhaps we'll meet you again on a different topic in the future. It'll be wonderful. I'm just going to take this opportunity, if you don't mind, to thank a few other people while we're at it, because this is the last lecture of this current series. And I just want to thank Danielle and Saoirse for their great help and support over the last few months. And we're looking forward to further collaborative efforts in the future. I want to thank everyone who's tuned in to watch our the little talks, as we call them now, over the last few months, especially our members who've been so supportive and have stood by us as we negotiate this very changed landscape. We hope to see everyone back in October, where with all going well, we'll be able to bring the members in to the lovely, wonderful lecture space in Nangle Place. And on that note, just in case anyone hasn't already said it, just to remind you that the members, there is a free virtual tour of Nangle Place next Saturday morning, if you'd like to avail of it. So with no further ado, I'm going to let you all get on with your Saturday and just say we're looking forward so much to seeing everybody back in October, when we were starting with the inimitable Jane Choi, and coming to us probably live from The Hague. Thank you so much for this morning, Bláithín, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Don't go just yet, Bláithín, because there's some questions.
Questions, and we have another thank you from Catherine Campbell, who says, thank you, Bláithín, absolutely fascinating. And the first question came from Mary Bryan, who spoke for us recently about Nangle and her early life, and she wants to know if James Nangle, the ex-Catholic translator, was related to the Nagles of Munster and Ballygriffin. That might be a difficult one to answer, but one for
he wasn't Nangle, he was Nangle. So I don't know whether that is probably part from the same roots of the same name, but I have no idea whether there's any relation there between him and any of the people in Ballygriffin. So I'm sorry.
Well, Mary's a great researcher in her own right, so hopefully she'll be working on that one. And then Anthony Harper asked, do any versions of the O'Donnell New Testament of 1608 still survive?
They do. They're very, very rare. I think I saw one that went up for, the last time I saw something go up for auction, it was in Christie's, and it was, I can't remember how much it was, but it certainly was well outside my budget anyway. So they are out there, but you'd want to start saving your pennies, Tony, if you want to buy one.
And Tony actually has another question. Was the reading aloud of the translation by Bedell's team done in imitation of the way the teams translating the King James Bible conducted their translation?
I would think so. I mean, that was the way that translations were generally done in those days. It wasn't a type of working that was unique per se to the Bedell team. It was the way the translations were done. So I would think so, yes.
Just call for any other questions. I was fascinated by how many names you mentioned that are kind of bibliophiles to be conjured with, because Usher and Laud and Mart all made kind of massive contributions to academic libraries in the end.
It did. I mean, and that is the thing. I suppose that there was this. I mean, I'm very in awe, if you like, of many of the clergy people of that time, because they were extremely learned men. You know, it wasn't enough for them just to be able to read and write, or for them to have a knowledge of the scriptures. They always kind of took it to the next degree, and not just in their academic qualifications, but they carried that interest on through their lives afterwards, and they continued. I suppose we have this idea of these gentlemen sitting in their studies late into the night, kind of working on great tomes, and I think there was probably a fair bit of truth in that. They were these very academic, learned figures. So yeah, they're all in there.
We have one more actually. Killian O'Sullivan is asking, are there any other extant copies of Bedell's translation? So you're using a Cotton.
Yes, they were purchased by the Cotton Library last I think it was October. That came up, and they don't come up very often because there's not a huge number of them out there, and usually once people have them, or institutions have them, they keep them. They don't let them go. There are less than 100 in Ireland that I'm aware of, but there are probably more than that around the world in general. Yeah, I mean, there's a copy of the first tranche of copies. There's a copy in Trinity College. There's one in Marshes, and I think there might be one in Robinson in Armagh. Outside of that, there was a reprint done in the early 19th century. So you'll often come across people say, "Oh, we have a Bedell at home," and yes, they probably do. But it was a reprint that was done in the 19th century. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with having that. It's a lovely thing to have, but it's not one of the first editions.
Just see if there are any more questions. Lots of thank yous.
Thank you.
Sorry, Danielle, could I come in with a comment, please?
Absolutely.
No, I found it fascinating to look at the text which you had displayed on screen, the extent to which I found it easy to sort of read it, and I suspect that this probably reflects the fact that I am old enough to have learned Irish initially using the old fonts rather than the post-1959 Cloro-Vonach, which is now used.
Well, I'd say in many ways, Brian, I would say that you are very privileged to have learned to read Irish in that script, because unlike you, I didn't get that chance. But I will say it is a very, very clear font. It's a very readable font, and if at all you have any knowledge of it, and what I liked about it, and it was on one of the slides that I had. I'll see if I can put it back up again. If I can get back. Oh, I don't think I have it here now. I had there was a screen there that I had where somebody had written on the inside cover. They had handwritten, I suppose, two columns. One was of the Irish script, and then its corresponding English/Roman script letter to help read it. And I've come across other books that of that, roughly of that time and even a bit later, that were in that where people had done that. It was handwritten, that they had to help themselves understand and to read through it, that they had done that translation themselves. But again, but I agree with you, it is a beautifully published work, especially given the time and given the work that would have had to go into to especially create the font.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable the way, I mean, we now find it so easy on computers to change fonts and to design fonts. You know, compared to the difficulty when you were talking about the movable type. And
exactly. And I think too, Brendan, the thing to remember is that that particular font was funded by Robert Boyle, who also spoke Irish fluently. His father, as William Bedell, were English, and they'd come across to Ireland, but they had gone out of their way to make sure that their children could speak Irish, because that, of course, was the language of the day, and it was the language of the people. And anybody that spoke English either spoke it having come from England as part of the plantations, or they spoke it as a second language. So Robert Boyle was sent to learn Irish from a native Irish family when he was a child, as were all his brothers and sisters. And I think too, when you speak about the work that would have gone into the font, because it was created in England, it was created in London, and presumably created by, I mean, and when I say created, I'm talking about the actual workmen, the men that made the font itself, who created it, who worked on it. They would not have been Irish speakers, so they would have had to work from drawings of what the final product should look like. So it was quite an undertaking.
That's very interesting. And does Robert Boyle's library survive?
His library too was passed on. I think most of it is in Oxford now, but in the what's the name of the library in Oxford? Oh, it's gone out of my head. Yeah, it's most of it is there, but yeah, it does. I mean, I think that was the way that these people, these learned people, they created these huge libraries, but they did tend, when they died, to pass them on to an institution rather than pass them through the family. It was this idea that their life's work should be available to a wider audience.
Well, it is fascinating to know what people were reading, isn't it? It gives us such a kind of window on what inspired them. I don't think we have any more questions. So we might just thank you again, and I know Lorraine and Brendan have already done that. Thank you from everyone at Nangle Place. I know we had some of our regular attendees attending today, so it's lovely to have a combined audience. And we'll be looking forward to seeing everybody who's going to join us for the guided tour, virtual guided tour next Saturday. And Bláithín, looking forward to meeting you in real life. Sometime.
Hopefully sometime, yes. Thank you again.
Thanks everyone, and enjoy your Saturday, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bláithín.
Thanks. Goodbye.